Got nothing inside, wanna watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride could make things right. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. Gotta wish tonight, baby, please set your thoughts aside. Guess it's been so long, maybe we could drive into the dawn. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. We could go nowhere. Got nothing inside, wanna watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride could make things right. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. Gotta wish tonight, baby, please set your thoughts aside. Guess it's been so long, maybe we could drive into the dawn. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session webinar on job leveling, promoting transparent and equitable workplaces. My name is Pernille Hibbe-Brun, and I'm moderator of today's webinar, where we have an esteemed panel with us with experts within this field of job leveling. I think we've hosted quite a few webinars so far in sessions, but I never had this many questions about this specific topic as I did this time, job leveling. What is job leveling? And every time I had to tell people, well, watch our webinar and you'll know after the webinar what job leveling actually is. So I think we have a topic here that is of interest to many, because when I then started also telling a little bit about it and putting my definition forward, which is about creating a clear career path in the organization, and also making sure that people are paid a fair pay for the work they're doing, then it's pretty sure that people have interest in this. That it's very clear that people would like to know more about, so how do we then make sure that people know exactly what to do at the workplace, and that they are paid a fair wage for their job. And it's much more than that. It's also because we need career paths that are clear, where there are clear role descriptions, where it's clear to all of us what's actually expected of you in a specific role. So I think this is of interest to all of us who has to do with organizations in our daily life, who are either leading them, managing in them, or employees employed in an organization where we are either growing, we already have grown, but we need to have that transparency about what's my role, what's my colleague's role, and how do we make sure that we can move freely into another position, and then also know what's expected of us there. So with me today, I have this panel of esteemed panelists who have different experiences promoting clear career paths and promoting job leveling frameworks, and also total rewards. So David, why don't you start out, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about your own background within this field.
Great, thanks, Pernille. So I've spent most of my career in HR, although I've dabbled in IT and also was a co-founder of a software startup. So I do have that sort of operational perspective. And then I have a lot of generalist experience, but most of my career has been in the total rewards and HR operations side of things, both in-house as well as a consultant. And for sure, as a consultant, the number one request I get from clients is to help them with mapping people to the right roles and leveling them relative to their level of proficiency and competency. So, and I've worked with both big and small companies, mostly tech and biotech, but also in other areas. But most of my focus lately has been on smaller companies, and that's why it's such a common request, I think. So.
Awesome, Dave. And we're looking so much more forward to hearing about your experiences and good advice to people who are just getting into this topic right now and maybe didn't know much about it before, and maybe some advice for them. Before we move on to you, Hannah, I just want to say one thing, and that is, if you have any questions, it would be great if you would put them in the chat, and you're also welcome to just say hi right now in the chat and tell us where you're dialing in from in the world, because there's also another thing about this topic that has to do with location and where you are in the world, and we'll touch upon these different differences depending on the globe where you're based, basically. So it's going to be interesting to see where you're dialing in from. And Dave, I know you're dialing in from California. Is that correct? Yes. Hannah, what about you? Where are you based? And if you could give us a sweet and short introduction to yourself, that would be nice too.
Super. Thank you very much, Pernille. I'm Hannah Blume, and I'm dialing in from Denmark. I'm the Chief HR Officer of Dovista, a company within the building industry. I think the number one with windows and doors in Europe. I have also, like you, Dave, spent most of my time in HR, or at least the last 15 years within HR. I've been the Chief HR Officer of different quite big organizations So all of them headquartered in Denmark, but international companies within energy, within telco, and now, yes, latest into to the building industry. So I'm definitely not an expert when it comes to job leveling or rewards or anything, but have kind of seen it play out in big organizations, and yeah, so that's my experience.
Yes, and you're being very humble, Hanne, because I know that you build up frameworks that supported the job leveling systems as well. So maybe not implementing them or figuring them out in the first place yourself, but for sure seeing from the HR perspective what it means, amongst other places in the Danish company Ørsted, where I think you played a role in securing that company a very nice place in being one of the best companies in the world to work for. So you're being humble, in my opinion, right now. Typical Danish trait, by the way. And what about you, Mark? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your expertise?
Sure. So I am also in Copenhagen, although not originally from here, as you can tell by the accent. Most of my career, I guess I'm the black sheep of the group. I've primarily been in hiring for the last 15 years. Although prior to the company I joined, I was in the people/HR space for 6 years. Most of my experience comes from scaling startups. I've never worked in a large corporate aside from my first job outside of university many years ago. And most of my experience has been, how to accomplish some of the challenges of job leveling, salaries, career ladders in a low-funded startup with very little resources, and how that affects what you do at the start of the funnel at hiring. So that's me.
So as you can tell, we have an expert panel here that is quite diverse, as we always aim for at these webinars. And I would like to start out with a very simple question, because you heard my definition before, short and sweet, about what's job leveling, or at least the answer I gave when people asked, what is this webinar all about? But Dave, what's your definition of job leveling, and why is it important to bring it to people's attention?
So for me, and I'm going to combine, we'll talk about job or role mapping as well as leveling. I mean, for me, leveling is trying to accurately, assign or determine an employee's level of competency, proficiency. So whether it's their level of knowledge, their problem-solving skills, communication, whatnot. And then the other part is important because it's what is your actual role, and mapping to what is it that you actually are expected to do, what's the reason for the job, etc. And those two combined, I think, are really the foundation for hiring people, to determine what's the recruiting profile look like. And there's kind of the job, the business part of it, but also the incumbent as well. So kind of two different things, but they hopefully all meet within the framework of the job and level. But obviously it determines how, for most companies anyway, what's the basis of their pay. And typically most companies will, if they can afford it, access some sort of market data source. And typically those companies have a catalog of jobs and how they define levels. And so that's how you kind of match apples to apples, so to speak. So for me, and then obviously from a career development standpoint, it creates this sort of career lattice in theory, where people understand, oh, if I want to advance upwards, what is the expectation? But I also think it's really valuable when you can see, what does that look like at my level? What does that look like in another function, in another role? So sorry, I was long-winded, but.
Thank you. And Mark and Hanne, do you have anything to add to that definition, or do you see it differently?
No, I think it's well said, Dave. To me, it's very much about creating structures and transparency, and for the feeling of being treated in a fair way. I think that's kind of in that respect, getting the basics right, so to say. So, but there are much more to it.
So Mark, the reason why I asked, do you agree, is that you said most of your expertise has been within the startup environment, and it sounds nice when Dave says then you can compare to other companies. But what if you are a startup, you only just started, and you don't even have time to just do the basics in terms of figuring out how to grow and maybe get funding and things like that? Do you then also need to spend time on job leveling? And if not, when do you start? At what level would it make sense?
I think the key mistake a lot of companies make when they look at job leveling, and whilst they're a startup, and I know startup is a very broad term, some companies with 500 people are still calling themselves startups, but let's say under 100 people, they create this very nice looking, here's your progression and here's your salary, and this is your equity piece, and that's fine, but most of them fail to factor in things outside of either the individual's control or their manager's control. So what's worked for me in the past is you have a part of the job leveling sphere, which is individual dependent and built by the people or HR team. But you also have, I guess you could call it like an invisible handbrake, which essentially is there to go, well, we can only do X if Y happens in the business. So you need to create that balance between what the individual can contribute to, but also where the business is. And, 10 people want to be managers and there's only 5 people on the team, you're not going to have 10 managers. So it's decoupling those two things to an extent so that there is a realistic opportunity, an expectation set from an early stage.
So the expectation setting is you mentioned the word. So now I'm just gonna take that sentence and ask you, Hannah and Dave, also. So where does the expectation setting come in here? And in terms of building up those structures, how much can you rebel against if you feel you've been put up or set up at a certain level, but you actually feel you are at a different level? Then what do you do as an employee, for instance?
So I think that's definitely an area where a lot of companies and leaders will struggle, and implementing structures like this takes a lot. It's not just defining it. If you start implementing it, it's a huge change, a change management thing but it goes with so much communication, and you can easily also do it wrong if you don't kind of know your business right. So I would say that communication is probably key in all this. And I have never been in a company where you don't often have to really explain this and in some ways massage it in, because a lot of people will also kind of think of maybe the company they came from who implemented it in a bit different way, or there can also be other companies where it has been kind of inflated a bit. So it is a difficult one, and I would say don't ever underestimate communication.
So Hannah, can you give us an example of how you did it at Ørsted or any of the other places where you've been implementing this?
We implemented it in Ørsted even before it got the Ørsted name, but it was on the back of a very big merger of 6 smaller companies, and we kind of had to align and to make sure that that people could feel that they fit into a structure, and also that they could see some transparency, and also we had also to kind of make sure that we were paying people in a fair way and all the stuff. And it was a huge implementation task, and it took quite some time to really also onboard every leader to this, because it can be quite difficult to explain to an employee. So I think it was probably, as far as I remember, a place where leaders and the HR people really went out hand in hand, trying to explain and to make it clear. But it's not a quick fix. It's something you'll need to work on, and also as maybe the company grows, or you will have other companies being merged in or whatever. So it is, yeah.
But it was to create that transparency and fairness and clear paths, and also, so with M&As, it's also a good idea to maybe think about this, because it can maybe unify the different ways it's been done in the different companies. Dave, do you have that same experience? You very often come in as a consultant, and you've seen many different companies implementing job leveling structures. Could you tell us a little bit about, maybe also a little bit about what frameworks different companies use with success, some best practices, and also perhaps a little bit about, like Hanne said, the communication part, and how does total reward fit into all this?
Yeah, great. I'll try. One of the things that I've often do with leadership teams, with the CEO typically, and their direct reports is, and that's worked well, especially for those teams that really embrace the exercises of developing a total rewards philosophy. And hopefully, it aligns with the company's, broader corporate org values. But it does speak to, and let's just use the example of like smaller companies where you can't compete with richer companies. And so you're not going to compete on salary or benefits. And oftentimes what comes out of this sort of exercise is we really believe in fill in the blank, developing employees. That's kind of a core value. So that often will translate in the best case scenario into people really being committed to this process. And it's many things. It's not just this framework for leveling and mapping people, but like the kind of the best, most evolved sort of example that I've seen is where in many small companies, you tend to hire a lot of entry-level people in like sales development. If you have a services function, they're often straight out of university. And at some point, a lot of those people, they either didn't know what they wanted to do for the rest of their life, or like they just wanted a job and now they're ready to move on. And so the best example I've seen is in one visit where I was in-house, the services organization had grown and a lot of people were kind of getting burnt out on it. And the leader of that organization started working with both the head of engineering and the head of IT, because there were a lot of transferable skill sets. And so they each had mapped out their own sort of development, sort of these leveling, lattices, ladders, and they worked with employees to figure out how they could actually transfer. It might not be up right away, but how to move across and then move up if that's what you wanted to do. And to Mark's point, there aren't enough, if everyone wants to be a manager, well, there's nowhere, not going to be near enough of those opportunities. So I do think people need to be creative and to communicate, this is our philosophy. Here's the business requirements drive everything. But I do think if you're a really developmentally oriented company, managers can get creative. So maybe in a traditional sense, they say, there's only one manager and they, span of control is whatever, 7 people, 8 people. But sometimes, if in this conversation, employees express and advocate for themselves, this is the sort of thing I want to learn next, or this is what I think I want to do, but can you help me figure out if that is in fact what I want to do, and if it is, how I get there. So I'm sorry, I'm getting really verbose here, but I do think it is, to Hannah's point, it's so important for employees and managers to have this ongoing conversation and to set expectations really clearly. And I'll leave with this one last thing. One of the things that I did at one company was to lead a bunch of focus groups based on some pulsing results and to kind of focus in on key results. And we split them up, but one of them was just managers, just to get their take on these issues. And there was this great debate around, one kind of side of the room said, I think the number one goal for a manager is to make their employees as marketable as possible, whether it's with our company or some other company. And the other half, well, it was more than half, kind of lost their mind. But I'm on the side of I think your mindset should be, and your kind of devotion to your employees should be, I really want you to be as marketable as possible. And hopefully, you know, we'll get to, keep you because that builds some goodwill, but also in time, there'll be other opportunities. But at the end of the day, if there isn't an opportunity, the best thing for the employee maybe is to go elsewhere. So I think that having the mindset was really helpful for some managers.
Yeah, and then you're also back to setting expectations, right? So, well, it doesn't look like we in the near future have that position for you here, or you won't be able to actually live out your best self based on what you just told us here. But also maybe have it the other way, where it's like giving maybe the harder feedback that you might think that you are at this level, but based on the expectation setting and the frameworks, we can actually have open up a conversation about where we see you, and maybe it's also check a checklist, kind of like to make it clear to you where we see you in this framework. And Mark, can you tell us a little bit about your experience from either one of the companies you work with or where you are right now, Invisible Technologies? How is it implemented and used in those settings?
Yeah, so Invisible is the wildest company I've ever worked for in terms of how they approach. They are contrarian when it comes to everything. So all of our salaries on our website, all of our equity on our website, and even the way job leveling, comp, bonuses, and equity are handed out is based on company performance. So everyone comes in at one of 7 levels, depending on their seniority. Every year in October, we go, okay, what level of profitability are we looking like, and how much of our margins improved, and then based off that number, we divide that pool up back into the partnership, and people get raises, not individually, collectively. And it's in a weird way acting as a filtering mechanism in the hiring process, because for a lot of the roles, we're not very competitive in the US. We pay principal software engineers $120,000 base, which is crazy to say, but peanuts compared to what some people are getting paid in the US. One of our engineers quit his job. He was making 1.4 million a year and joined us for 120. And a lot of that comes down to, well, it's transparency beyond just 6 or 12 months. It's for 5 years, because we've modeled out our growth and gone, well, this is your salary now. And if we continue on the path we're on, this is your salary in 5 years. This is how you're bonus. And everything is out there in the world. You can go on the website now, visible.co, and see everything. How we do our interviews, how we do promotions. One of our core values is meritocracy. We have some great stories about Amy. Joined us 6 years ago as Francis, our CEO's EA. She kept moving up in the company. She kept training. She kept hustling, learning. She's now our chief people officer, and she's by far one of the most competent chief people officers I'd ever interacted with. So there is a very different mindset obviously built into that the tag we have is no employees allowed. And the whole argument is, well, employees do what they're told to do, partners own their area and grow it. So with that comes, a bit of opaqueness into what a person's function actually is, because it's so broad. But that's also the whole purpose of why we built this partnership, is that you're not siphoned into one action or one output, you're siphoned into multiple. And your growth is dependent on your performance on quarterly and annual performance reviews, if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's very interesting and a very transparent example of how you can use this in a very transparent way. And Hanne, what does this make you reflect on? And can you maybe build some comments into this also in terms of why you think it's not always like that? Because there are usually very good reasons why people do what they do. So seen from your perspective and your experiences, what's your thoughts on this?
It's very different, and I think you should always kind of think of what does it give to your company? Because there are probably not one model that would work everywhere, but it kind of more raises some questions for me as well. Because if I can ask you a question, Mark, do people, if they kind of, I like that they know about the processes and so on, but when you are so open telling the salaries of everyone and so on, what does it mean to the organization? Is something that is discussed, or are people then feeling even more fairly treated, or what? How is it?
Yeah, because it's bands. We have 7 levels in the business.
Okay, yeah.
It's not like, oh, this person makes 10 grand more and that person makes. It's like set levels. There's no negotiation.
Okay.
Yeah. So in one sense, it's easier because I don't have to negotiate with candidates, because it's like, it's this or nothing. But also, it just removes that whole problem from the equation. You don't need to worry about employees talking about their salary, because the pay model is really like disjointed, and all of these things that create a degree of fear amongst management teams that don't do this correctly. It's like, it's just a problem that doesn't exist anymore, because it's all our company. It's like, I can go into anyone's performance management review. Everyone in the partnership can. We can go into all of our financial records. We can view the board meetings. It's like hyper transparency. And I recognize that this won't work in every business. It's very unique how it's being built. I can only imagine the type of chaos a business like us still would have, with thousands of employees and trying to level people out. I think it'd drive you insane. But yeah, it is unique and it works. We'll see how it keeps scaling.
So Mark, given that most of us aren't self-actualized yet, so how do you maybe you don't have it in this, maybe you're a totally self-actualized organization, but since things are so transparent, how do you deal with an employee saying like, wow, I don't understand why Mark is at level 5, I'm at a level 3, I see, and his manager, by the way, is really easy, or whatever, oh, they're best, whatever, you get all this noise, and it just seems like, how do you manage that sort of situation if you have them?
So it happens on the front end. We're in the process of essentially building, like, what's a partner DNA from a trait perspective, from a PILI perspective, from the long-term vision is we'll have 42 data points on every single candidate before we make a decision on them. But it's a model of output. We actually don't even look at CVs that much. There's no real clear correlation in backgrounds from our candidates. And it's purely we haven't had, let me rephrase, we've had one person leave the partnership in the last 2.5 years.
Wow.
So there's something to it. I think there's a very interesting question in the chat right now that I'm just gonna draw up and to your attention, and you can all answer to this. But I would like for you to start, Dave, maybe commenting on this question: how do you ensure that job levels does not get seen as a checklist to get promoted, and/or a race towards the top of the range?
So I think, again, it kind of goes back to not only expectations, but specificity in terms of to move beyond kind of the generic criteria you see to make it really meaningful for that role, that department, that org. So it's in the language of that org and that people understand what it is. I think the other piece that's probably the most beneficial for me anyway, all of these things are kind of a forcing and alignment function. So I don't think you can create these sorts of levels, criteria, or level people in isolation. And it only really works if leaders commit to talking with each other about what does whatever level look like to you. Give me an example of someone in your organization who is at that level and or why they're not at that level. And it's a lot of work, but I do think that then drives all these other things, like what are they ready for? Or maybe I have an opportunity, or they should get that pay raise, or no, they shouldn't. Or so
communication again. We're back to you, Hannah, and your whole point about communication.
Yeah, but and if it's okay to add something, I have definitely seen this becoming in some way a race towards the top of the range, or also kind of a race to kind of talking so much about promotions, getting promoted, and definitely I've also changed the way we have worked with, be it doing the people reviews and so on. Whenever you assess potential, for what is it? Is it for promotions or is it for something else? So it's also very much about how you set it up and what you talk about. But you can easily get into kind of a race where everything just ends up talking about promotions and whether it's fair or not. And if I should say I've taken also one learning, then it is to add a lot of rigor into these processes, because whenever you kind of there will always be promotions where people kind of are lifted by the hands of God some way and you cannot really explain it, and then it becomes extremely difficult. So
So what you're saying is that it should be clear why people are getting promoted, and that the managers to be equipped to have that conversation with the employees about the reasons and why it is some people are getting promoted and some are not in specific instances. And sometimes if you have two who are equally fit to get promoted, how do you then decide?
Promote neither. It's the only fair way. No, I think it's also like the hard part with this is, maybe this is like an overly nihilistic view of, hiring in HR is, two people enter into a social contract with the best of intentions, but people are extremely complicated and it's very, very difficult to nail down performance from like a tangible metric. It's easier in some jobs like sales. It's like the output is very easy to track, but how do you track which engineer is better? How do you know which portfolio analyst has done more analysis? It's very hard sometimes to factor in luck and timing. And that's also a very hard thing to say to an employee, like bad luck, bad timing. It's not factored into the model. It's not a box ticking exercise. It's just you're unlucky. And that's, it's very difficult, but also it's like, the biggest problem is most businesses are very bad at understanding how one person's output impacts the overall strategic goals of the business, because some businesses are massive. How is one person in one department impacting a $10 billion a year revenue business, and how do you analyze their output as a percentage towards that goal? And it's impossible. You can use a Pareto distribution, which is the square root of the total amount of participants account for 50% of the output. So like when you're small, it's pretty easy. When it's big, it's pretty bad. And it's also, one of the main reasons why corporations crumble. It's, 10,000 person corporation. What's the square root of 10,000? 50, 55? I can't remember. But once those people start leaving, there's a vacuum, companies crumble, and that's what of the S&P 500 from 20 years ago, 54% of the companies that were there 20 years ago don't exist anymore. So it's also looking into that. It's like, how do we measure what good is if we don't know what good actually is? Not so much an answer, more of a just give up. It's too hard.
Yeah, but it's interesting because we are talking about, there are companies like Radford and other companies living from providing the data to make sure there is this transparency, and also the structures to implement and the levels, the different levels to compare with. But is there an optimal time, in your opinion? And Dave, I would love for you to just start talking about this. Is there an optimal time to start a job architect project? And this can be size-wise. It can also be in terms of M&As or other things that might influence the right time to actually start on a project like this, in your opinion.
I'm obviously really biased, but I always think sooner rather than later. And part of it is also just aligning the management team. And, and early, at least for a lot of startups that I've been at, it's a little bit like, the frontier, the wild frontier. And you want people like that in a lot of ways because they're doers and they do whatever is necessary. But at some point, it gets to be a little chaotic and you need order. So that said, I do think, and it always starts at the top. And I was just thinking in terms of when Mark was talking, I don't know I know this is a global audience, but I know for myself, I have adult daughters, but when they were growing up, they grew up in this era of where everyone got a ribbon, everyone got a great job, whatever. And it's a bit of a stereotype, but I do think it's true in the workplace where certain generations of people they're expecting something every 6 months. They're almost on like, I put my coin in, I should be getting something, right? So I do think there is that added challenge. And going back to kind of the Radford thing, kind of the opposite of Mark's company, which I find really refreshing, is the other side is in reaction to this sort of, not being self-actualized, companies are thinking, oh, can I slot in? Can I break up the red levels and double them? And then, make them more increment so that people feel like they're getting promoted all the time. And then there's this title inflation, which a lot of you have seen. But all that stuff, I think, has to start from the very top. And that at least sets the tone, even if it's informal. And I think early days, you have to kind of keep it simple. And I think, and sometimes you don't have access to Radford, so you make do. But I do think having some sort of framework is helpful. And then speaking of M&As, certainly if you're acquiring other companies, they tend to be smaller. So they probably have generally less infrastructure than yours, but you need, I think, some sort of, as part of the integration process, a way to incorporate people, their roles, their levels. Their titles are often more elevated if they're a really small company. So that's something, again, that you need to have, I think, a clear stance on, because otherwise it's whoever is the squeakiest wheel gets kind of the oil. But I don't know if I just ramble there like I typically do.
I'm wondering, Hannah, did you have any inputs for, so Radford is based out of the US. Of course, they distribute that out of globally all over the world. But when you've had experience with building this up, or either Ørsted or Dovista or wherever you've been, Hannah, what frameworks have you used?
I think this is not about the framework. It can work. I've used different frameworks. For the time being, we're using the Mercer system, but it could be everything else. I think where I have had most struggles has been when you come to different continents. It's definitely different if you go to Asia or if you go to the US compared to Europe. That's probably where I think it has been most difficult, and I'm not sure I even have the right answer here.
So what have you done to mitigate that? Because I know you work for organizations that had employees across different locations. Did you then use the local one and then as a framework or something to refer to, or did you have something that was the same across the globe?
For the time being, we are having one system that can kind of frame it all, but then with some local iterations, which actually works. But I'm not sure if that's actually the right way to go. But that's something we are trying also to develop and to be a bit more agile. Actually, I think we should also both think of the kind of the local needs and traditions and so on. And we also have areas where we have a younger population, which sometimes also expects something different.
And it's interesting you
something
say
that can be within the same frame overall.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you raise your doubt and that you're actually honest about, well, you're not sure this is the right model you have right now. Now we try this. because I have another question, which is like, if you set goals and rewards for performance metrics in a society and in the world like we have right now, which is pretty chaotic and full of chaos and moving goals and targets all the time, very complex. How can we even implement something today that might not even fit the world of tomorrow? I don't know if you've given it some thought as well, Dave and Mark, that can add to Hannah's inputs in terms of agility and how to take that into consideration.
Yeah, I think that's a real challenge. I've mostly worked with organizations that, even when they're small, which makes it even tougher in lots of different countries. And I think this sounds like a cop-out answer, but I think you start with just a conversation and understanding, what are the values, the realities of their marketplace and culture. Like, for example, a common one is a lot of cultures, they value seniority. It's cut and dry. They're not as much of a meritocracy. It's more about, well, it's meritocracy, but it's based on, your tenure, whatnot. You've kind of gone through this sort of traditional, and that's a tough one if the company's founder or leader is, it's all performance based. So I think you do need to kind of find some place to compromise, but it is difficult, and especially if I've been with companies who want to be quite mobile within the company. They are open to, even though it's expensive, moving people from one place to another. And especially now with post-pandemic, people feel like they can work from anywhere. So that adds another layer of complexity. But yeah, I think all you can do is talk about and try. And at the end of the day, I hate to keep saying it's the leader's responsibility, but the leader is the one that has to say, this is how it's going to be. I've gotten everyone's inputs, and this is the criteria, take it or leave it.
So there's an interesting input from you, Mark, before, where you said it all started with, the vision and the needs of the company. And maybe you can add or elaborate a little bit on that. And then I have a very specific question from one in the audience that I would like to pull in as well. But sure. Let's start with you, Mark, maybe some.
Yeah, so firstly, how we approach it, and secondly, to Dave's point of actually how that problem is actually even a bigger problem in the global workforce. But the way we do it is, start of every year, CEO goes into our HRIS, 5 strategic goals for the year. Departments go in, how are we going to hit these? And then the team members go in and go, these are what we're going to do to hit the department goals, which are going to go hit the company goals. And that's how we do performance management. Obviously, we iterate quarterly because sometimes a big 180 happens and we have to go in and tweak a few things. And maybe it's a bit too simple, but that's what's worked for us so far. In terms of the moving goals constantly and the complexity, it's, you look at how complex jobs have become in the last 10, 15 years. Things are getting more and more complicated. And then you look at the workforce and you go, okay, is the workforce scaling to that level of complexity? Because we're going to get to a point of scarcity, I think in around 15 years, we're not going to have enough people. And, for all this talk about AI, changing the world and automating everything, and, look at the unemployment rates globally, they're the lowest they've been in around 30 years. So that's not the answer. So I think there's going to be a tectonic shift in how we look at work, from what does a person do in the business, and what does a machine or a robot do, and what can they do? And until we understand that balance, I think a lot of businesses are going to be kind of shocked in around 10 or 15 years to go, well, we pay person X $100,000 a year, 70% of their time is admin. Why are we paying $100,000? How do we unlock people's creative selves to do high value work and give machines I have to go into Excel and make sure payroll is being done correctly? So I think that's even the bigger problem that kind of links to what Dave was talking about as well.
Yes, and it also links to this question I was talking about before that I would like to drag in about scarcity, because this was actually what this question was also about. You know, some areas, in specific IT areas, has scarce resources. So how do we attract, people in those instances where there's scarcity and we have the need to meet the market value?
I can go again if you want.
Yes.
So, what is it? The law of any market is scarcity increases risk tolerance. So factor that into any of your decisions. I think it's an understanding of the business perceived need for X, which is a certain level of skill, will output Y. If the business can't afford X, rather than looking for that, you need to look for something else. And it's about tweaking how you pay in terms of, is it better to hire a super experienced, technology leader and bring in more junior people that they can upgrade? Or is it better to bring in 3 or 4 senior software engineers that can then just be, work by themselves? And that really depends on the product you're building, what the roadmap looks like, but also being open to the fact that, most people don't know what they really want. People will say, "Oh, I want this, I want that," but most people don't really know what they need or want as well. So part of it is a selling function. You speak to a candidate and you go, "What is it you're looking for in your next job that you don't have now? Can you offer that? And if so, sell that." Most people will forego significant salary raises if they feel they're going to be challenged. It's a deep psychological need for us to be challenged. We enjoy working towards a goal more than actually achieving it. We're weird creatures. So if you can put that into hiring, you can hire anyone.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm gonna hide this. I also want to draw out this comment from Mohammed. I think it came right after you said you were in doubt, Hannah. And I just like that he commented on the fact that, sometimes you want the answer, but sometimes there's not one answer, or maybe there are several answers. And just raising that voice of, well, we try this now, we're not sure it's the right approach, let's maybe look at other ways to do it, and examples from companies who has done it differently, like you said, you're inspired by Mark, but also maybe it won't work in this context, and being able to also look at it from a global perspective. So Dave, how does that play out in the organizations you've been, when you work with the total rewards philosophies, and you maybe help the executive team deliver on the message, or whatever their philosophy was? What if they didn't agree, or what if what came out of it was not in alignment what the expectations was from the employee side? And could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, it's common for there to not be complete alignment, and I'll give you a couple of examples. One is transparency. So executives tend, no matter how progressive you think they might be collectively as a whole, actually, when you actually talk to each individual, and then what I like to do is I talk to them individually, usually with the head of HR, bring them all together with the CEO, and they have discussion. So transparency is one. And the common response is, I really want to be more transparent, but we're not ready, or we're not mature enough. And the other side will go, well, you'll never be ready, so you have to force yourself to be, whatever. So, and then another one is about, do you want to be egalitarian? Like, we're all equals, but yet you have to deal with the realities of the marketplace. And it sounds a little bit like Marx. It sounds like a pretty egalitarian company, very transparent. So at the end of the day, to answer your question, I think you have the discussion, but again, at the end of the day, the leader is going to have to say, again, maybe they find some compromise, or they try and agree to at least move in a particular direction, and they have things to do. So that's one. One thing that I found was, this is a little bit maybe related, but the next step beyond kind of aligning on values, I think, is you get feedback. How well are we doing? Here it is. Here's what we came up with. And to ask employees, and there's lots of different ways to get their inputs. But, and this is the hard part, is asking, but then acting on and sharing with them, here's what you told us, here's what we plan to do. And so one of the things that I thought was really useful, especially if you are in a company of limited resources, is to get the data, talk to employees, and get them to ask them, how would you prioritize? And so when it comes to like benefits and comp, all right, if you get one big budget thing, what would that be? You get 5 votes for less expensive things. Anyway, put all that together, present it to the executives, and that then creates another sort of ongoing set of, dialogue around how do we kind of, meet the gap while having limited resources and having an engaged employee population. And, and to Mark's point, I really do think, I think it only takes a handful of people who are leaders, regardless of their level, who can influence a company, an organization, and that creates this sort of synergy that then you can go sell, and candidates can feel it. Even when you're in Zoom calls, I think anyway, maybe I'm being naive, you can feel kind of the level of engagement in an organization, and it only takes a few key people to create that. And the other way is true too. It only takes a few to make it all go pear-shaped.
So Hannah, you're sitting there smiling, and it was also a comment to your honesty before. Let me hear your perspective.
Yeah, well, I'm just kind of listening in. It in many ways it resonates. Sometimes things are different in bigger groups, but what I can probably definitely learn from you, Dave, and maybe also from you, Mark, is to just build this as simple as possible. Sometimes it tends to be extremely complicated, and you are right. If you make it simple enough, it doesn't take up that many resources.
So Hannah, have you also experienced having, because you are internal, where Dave very often comes in. I know you've been internal as well, Dave, sometimes, but as a consultant, external consultant. But Hannah, you are inside, and your role then, how does that play out in terms of maybe helping CEOs or people in the upper level management understanding the importance of implementing either more transparency into the system, or a framework where people can see themselves progress or move, and expectation setting alongside that as well?
Yeah, it's not that difficult to actually explain that this is necessary. I think it's more actually how the systems works and how the structure work, and because there are also quite some biases within this, which you also need to kind of have to overcome, and that's probably maybe also working more with diversity and inclusion over the last years, where I really feel that we have benefited from having these structures. So that's actually an area where I've seen more senior people saying, we need this transparency, we need these systems, because that's a way where we can really make people feel that they are fairly treated, and also even make sure that we pay equal salaries for equal jobs and so on. So it's not explaining the need for this. It's more making up the communication, the change process, and really being clear on how it works.
So you actually just came up with another reason, which is to mitigate bias.
Yeah, that's an area where I've really benefited from having these processes, and also having had or put really the rigor into this, because that's an area where we really benefited, and also in one of the companies I've been in, kind of were really one of the front runners in making sure that that we took all we could out of this in order to kill biases or favoritism or whatever you could call it. So yeah.
Yes. So just being aware of, time is flying. We only have 5 minutes left. And I would love for each of you just to wrap up. You get 1 minute each to just tell us your key takeaways and maybe a good advice for people who would like to get started with job leveling and didn't know what it was before they listened to the webinar perhaps, but now they know a bit more. Where should they start? Something like that to wrap it all up. And Mark, why don't you start?
I knew I was going to go first, but I think it's like go to Dave. Yeah, I think in the context of startups, it's don't overcomplicate it. Keep it simple. Focus your time on understanding what output looks like in the business, more so than what a career ladder looks like. If you can nail output and measuring output early, it gets so much easier. Focus on that, figure out methods to measure it, and then the career ladder and job leveling, it will come a lot easier. And don't make it too complicated.
Thank you. And Dave, what's yours?
Well, Mark summarized it so concisely and so effectively. I don't know if I can add. I would just add, I do think, and I've said this already probably too much, but the higher the level of leadership that's committed to this process, the better. But in the absence of that, is to maybe find a champion, a leader who has credibility, who believes in this, the development of employees, to then, get things rolling. And again, keep it simple and talk. It's just really as simple as that. Just talk with others kind of regularly, and things change. It's very dynamic, obviously. So
thank you. And Hanne, what's your last good advice and input?
It's good with my colleagues in this panel really wrapping this up. If I should add something, I would say make sure to link it to all the other HR processes that you are running to really get the best out of it, and make it a basis for many of the discussions, be it the people, organizational reviews, and so on. I think that means a lot. But keep it simple. Don't start too late. Be fair. Think of your communication. Be transparent. Be rigorous. That's I think that's and learn along the way, because this is an area where we can all learn and where we should also be good at putting more agility in. A lot of companies have had kind of one process a year or two processes. That's not the way it works now. We need to be more agile.
Yes,
but not sticking to processes.
Well, thank you so much to the three of you for being in this panel today. I can also see in the chat that a lot of people are thanking you for sharing your experiences. We will keep on talking about this topic also on Session's website in our articles and guides. So follow us there if you do not do that already. And again, this was recorded, so we're also going to share the recording. You can share it with your colleagues and your co-workers. And thank you again so much, Dave, Mark, and Hanne for contributing to today's webinar.
Pleasure. Enjoyed it. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Got nothing inside, wanna watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride can make things right. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. your thoughts aside.